Yep. It's frozen a little bit. Okay, well, welcome. And if you want to find your seat, that'd be great. We are so excited to have you all with us for this technology seminar. And just glad you could join us, and glad our speakers could be with us. I'll introduce them in a moment, but I need this. I was telling you this morning, I'm on a 30-day Twitter break, and I'm 3 weeks in, and I'm not kidding you. About every 6 hours, I go, I really should check it. I really should check it. And I say, no, I'm happy without it. And Twitter I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter because it's, for a pastor, you learn so much. There's so many theologians and resources and read this article about culture. Here's this new book on the Trinity. And it's wonderful, but I cannot keep up with it. I cannot keep up with the amount of information coming at me. It doesn't make me wise necessarily to have just tons of info. So I'm actually wanting to come away from this evening thinking, what would be some good practices and some boundaries to set for my usage of Twitter? So I hope you all have, some of you have kind of a specific thing you've been thinking about, like maybe I should do X or not do Y or something. Or you're just kind of curious about what is the position we should take about technology. But we're very excited. I forgot my notes. I don't have all my notes over here. Thank you. We have Richard Price and Matt Richey with us. We're very excited. And Richard is Director of Pastoral Care at Sunset Bible Church over in University Place. He's also a professional marriage and family therapist. And you know him, many of you know him, because he was here for our seminar that we did on fear and anxiety, which was very helpful. And you can read more about Richard on the bio. There's a little piece of paper on your table that has more details about their background and their education and families. Matt Richey's also on staff at Sunset Bible, has been a pastor for a number of years. He's also worked with teens and students over at what used to be TBS, is now Sound Christian Academy for the last 9 years. He's been working there, and so thank you, brothers, for being here this evening. We're honored to have you. Announcement about the food. So at 6 o'clock is the dinner hour. Okay, 6 o'clock, and not a moment before that. And I tried to get a cookie, but Mr. King cut me off at the pass. So at 6 o'clock, you go back and you get your food and bring it back to your table, and we'll go right on into the next seminar, okay? And if you have children, it's different. The plan is different from what we said this morning. So you are not going to be helping them get their food and come back. They're going to go right into the room immediately behind here, which is kind of the lounge room, we call it. So the kids are going to go right back in there. The food is back there, and they will just go ahead and eat back there, if that makes sense. Mrs. King, is that accurate, what I just said? Okay. You're on your cell phone. You were texting. You were on TikTok looking at cat videos, weren't you? Okay. No, I just said the kids are going to get their food back here, 6 o'clock, and just take it back. It's already back there. Okay, perfect. So for the adults, you grab your food, you bring it back to the table, and both sides of that table, there's sub-sandwiches and fruit and chips and cookies, and there's drinks over here. And then I think Linda is ready for the children to go right on up now, up to the upstairs. Is that accurate? That's what I was told. Okay, so the kids, if they're not already up there, which looks like they are, can go right on up to that fireside room up there. That's great. Okay, any questions about that? All right, I will pray for us. Heavenly Father, we love you and we want to seek your glory this evening. We ask for your wisdom and guidance. We ask that you would help us to think carefully about this issue that is so prominent in our lives these days with technology and new technologies all the time. And we want to be wise stewards. We want to use these things in a way that furthers your kingdom and is healthy for our souls and enables us to love others and to fulfill our callings. And so we look to you this evening. Would you teach us? And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Matthew Richey. I am a pastor at Sunset Bible Church. I am also a high school Bible teacher at Sound Christian Academy, where I've been for the last 9 years. Might be I'm kind of an interesting person to be doing a technology conference because I'm not really that techie of a person. I would rather be reading books than watching cat videos and TikTok, but that's just me. But I'm heavily invested in this. For a number of reasons. For one, being a high school teacher, I see the impact of this all the time, a lot of these issues. I think this is something, frankly, that often the church and parents aren't leading, discipling, and parenting in ways that they need to be. I think there's a lack sometimes of engagement. I'm also the parent of 3 children, and I know that they're growing up in a digital age. And I think one of the really difficult things, and we'll be talking a little bit about this in a minute, one of the really difficult things about being a parent today is just how quickly things are changing. And it used to be, for generations, it used to be that the way you grew up was roughly the way that your children would grow up. And you could engage with the world that they were living in. You understood what they were going through. And you still understand more than they think you do, probably. But the world has changed a lot, and it's difficult to keep up with everything. It's not reasonable to keep up with everything. It really isn't. And I'm not on Twitter, so I'm even further behind than David is. So our conference today, God, Technology, and You, a biblical approach to living in the digital age. We're using, it's not working. Can we just go to the next slide? There we go. Now it's working. All right. We're using 2 books primarily here. So I'm going to be talking about this book, my notes are built on from this book, From the Garden to the City, The Place of Technology in the Story of God. This guy's an interesting guy. He's a seminary prof, and he works in technology. He does both things, and so he's uniquely prepared for that. And Richard's going to be talking from 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Reinke. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Forward by John Piper, if that helps orient you. I heard you guys were Presbyterian or something, so that might help. Okay, so yeah, this is not working for me again. So why this conference? The need for digital technologies. Some of this you might know. Go to the next slide. So we live in a digital world. We're increasingly living in a digital and virtual world. Social media has changed the game with how we relate to each other. Most of you probably know that. If you've been following the news, ChatGPT, we've started to get papers coming in as teachers that AI wrote for them. And we can still catch them as teachers, but there might come a point where they can't. The way we catch them is AI. AI helps us catch the AI papers. But so this is a problem. But I think oftentimes, and I think this would be a major mistake, and it seems to me already, just from a little bit of interaction, that this isn't a mistake many of you would make. But many people think, this is a problem for younger generations, for younger people. And that is absolutely not the case. One of the things that study after study show is that kids really are bothered by how unavailable their parents are. Because they're so engaged with their phone, they're so engaged with with technology, they're so distracted that so many young people wish that they could have better conversations with their parents, but their parents aren't paying attention. This is true of grandparents too. I for years resisted getting a smartphone because I'm just kind of a Luddite, and my grandma would send me texts that my phone couldn't read. And my grandma uses Facebook and I don't. So, it's not just a younger person generation problem. I am sometimes grieved with seeing older generation, and sometimes this is because they're lonely and they're not connected, increasingly living on social media rather than having real relationships and conversations with their family and friends. I think it's replacing many functions that the church and other communities used to fulfill. So although the Bible does not talk about smartphones, that's hopefully not a surprise to you, or the internet or social media, I do believe it provides us with a foundation from which to evaluate our participation and use of devices and platforms. So a few statistics, Am I just depending on you at this point? This is, okay, all right. So a few statistics. I'm going to try to move through these quickly. And I think you can see these. So hours using electronic devices today, this is from Barna Group. It's a Christian organization. From age 9 to 12, it's just under 5 hours a day using electronic devices. When you move up to 13 to 17, it's about 5.3, and parents are not that far behind, 4.6. Do you sleep with the phone next to you? 72% of children aged 9 to 12 sleep with a phone next to them. 13 to 17, 82%. Parents, 70%. A story on that. So in my Bible classes in high school, we talk a lot about virtues and vices and habits and how they shape us and how they form us. And I remember we were doing some experiments with this, that they had to give something up for such and such a time, or track how much time they were using on this or that. So I walked into the lunchroom at the school where I teach, and these kids were talking about the very thing we were doing in class. So I walked up and engaged them, and there was this girl, I think she was 16 or 17, and she had already been on this app for 6 hours. I'm like, wait a second, it's noon. How could you have been on the app for 6 hours? Because we don't allow you to use cell phones in class. How is that even possible? And she said, oh, no. 4 of those don't count because that was from midnight to 4. And I'm like, oh, well, it's not that I'm boring. That's not why you're falling asleep. It's because your parents aren't parenting, if I can be frank. And you have your phone and it's a distraction and you are not able to do what you need to be doing, which is sleeping. And the vast majority of children and parents have smartphones, as you can see. We'll go to the next slide. I'm going to try to go through some of this fairly quickly because I'd like to have some interaction. But technology is the number one reason that parents believe that raising kids is more complicated than in the past. So I don't know how well you can see that chart, but 78% of parents would say that you would either strongly agree or partially agree or somewhat agree that raising kids is more complicated now than it was when they were a kid. So 78% compared to 8% who would disagree with that. So that's a pretty radical difference. 78% of parents say it's more complicated. And the next slide. So why is it more complicated? And there's different reasons that you can pick, but the number one reason chosen, technology and social media, 65% of parents say that makes it more complicated. So if this is something that parents are feeling, that schools are feeling, I think grandparents, you have a role in this as well, then this is something the church needs to be doing, digital discipleship. This is not an area that we can just release to other people to do. The church needs a role in this. Families need a role in this. Schools need a role in this. Educators need to be thinking about this. Go ahead, the next slide. So technology, the point of this conference, I hope you don't hear this today, the point of this conference isn't to beat up on technology. I actually believe that technology is a function of being in the image of God. And I'm going to argue for that in a little bit. I think we were created to be creators. They were created to be like God in this way. That God is a creator, we're many creators, and technology is part of how we do that. But there are some things about technology today that are unique. So in what ways has technology made your life easier? I won't read all of these, but I'll highlight a couple. So 72% access to much more information, although I don't know how much of that is good information, but there is a lot of it that is. The thing online, you can find all the right answers and all the wrong answers. I mean, it's there. It's definitely there. More connected to friends and family, 64%. And those are good things. I have my best friend lives in France. I have a really good friend who lives in Amman, Jordan. They're missionaries there. And if we were living decades ago, I would have no relationship with them. I meet with them once a month on Skype. We talk, we pray, we connect with each other, we encourage each other. It's a wonderful thing. I would have lost those relationships in many ways. So there is a very real good that technology can provide. On the bottom of that chart, though, 16% makes me a better person. That's pretty low. And 3%, it makes your life easier. That's really low. So 3% makes your life easier. So go ahead. Oh, sorry, hasn't made my life easier, but we'll get on the difficult side in the set. So next slide. In what ways has technology made your life more difficult? And I, as a high school teacher, I see this all the time. I waste a lot of time. Yes, we do. And it's not just high schoolers. I promise you. Let's not just beat up on them. Parents are really just about as bad. I procrastinate, 53%. That seems really low to me, frankly. My device separates me from others. So isn't it interesting that this thing that can connect us can also separate us and isolate us? I'm anxious when not on my phone, 24%. And then at the bottom, only 8% would say it hasn't made life more difficult. So only 3% would say it hasn't made life easier, and only 8% would say it hasn't made life more difficult. And I think you can see, it's made life a lot easier in a lot of ways, and it's made life more difficult in a lot of ways. It's complicated. It's not purely good, it's not purely bad, but it's also not, and this is one of the things I would really want you to get today, probably the number, if you could take one takeaway, it is not neutral. That technology is not neutral. It's shaping, it's forming you, it's discipling you, I would say. So next slide. Some other statistics. Again, I'm trying to move quickly here so I don't steal all of Richard's time. This one, I think if we do this in 10 years, it's going to be higher. About 45% of teens and 31% of adults are online almost constantly. I remember hearing this guy, he reports on the NBA. I'm a basketball fan, and he said that he was on his phone between 18 to 20 hours a day. Now that's extreme, but 45% of teens, 31% almost constantly. The vast majority of people are online. Social media platforms, that includes things like YouTube. Sometimes people forget YouTube is a social media platform as well. 68% of parents say they at least sometimes feel distracted by their phone when spending time with kids. And I think that's something worth asking yourself of how fully engaged are you if you're a parent or a grandparent or around children. How fully engaged are you? And about 1 in 5 children has a smartphone by the age of 8. It's been a little unnerving to me. I have 3 children, age 10, 8, and 6, for these kids to come to birthday parties and say, "What's your Wi-Fi password?" I'm not giving that to you. Oh, I don't know. So, what does the Bible have to say, next slide, about technology and digital discipleship? Well, in some ways, not much, and in some ways, quite a lot. It has a lot to say about discipleship. It has a lot to say about how we should be shaped and formed. And even though I may not specifically mention some of the technologies that we use or that we're engaged in, I think the Bible has a lot to teach us here. So next slide. So if we're going to be talking about technology, what do we mean by technology? I think that would be an important. John Dyer, that's From the Garden to the City guy, he wrote that technology is the human activity of using tools to transform God's creation for practical purposes. Let's think about that. The human activity of using tools to transform God's creation for practical purposes. What was the first job that God gave Adam and Eve? Okay, name the animals, all right? And there's a thing with language that goes along with that, right? What's another job that God gave Adam and Eve? Take care of the garden. And taking care of the garden means shaping and forming your environment. My wife is a huge gardener. I'm not. I'd rather be reading books. But my wife, what she does, we just moved into a new house about 6-8 months ago, and she's transformed the yard. She's taken what was kind of chaos, and she's given it order. And now there's these spaces that have function and purpose. And that's what gardening is. It's taking something that's kind of wild and giving it purpose and form and function. God didn't make the whole world a garden. He gave them the Garden of Eden, but I wonder if eventually that's our whole job, right, is to finish the job, that God has given us the job of cultivating, ruling over the earth, taking what is chaos and giving it order and function. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's part of what it means to be in the image of God, is that God is the creator. God is the one who gives order and purpose and function, and he's given us the dignity of giving the world around us purpose and order and function, of creating. And we do that with language, we do that with gardening, we do that with all sorts of things. Encyclopedia Britannica is the application of scientific knowledge to the practical aims of human life, or, as it is sometimes phrased, to the change and manipulation of the human environment. See some similarities there, but I hope you can also see how that could be good or bad. Good or bad. It could be creation affirming or not affirming, in line with God's purposes and intentions or not. Next slide. So when we talk about creating, what do we mean? Like, what do we create? And Dyer has 5 categories of creation. First, there's things. So we make things. So hammer, nails, a bridge, utensils. Those are things that we create and we invent. They make life easier. They have purposes and function. We can do our jobs better. Even those things form us. Images are something we create. I love to think of God as an artist. Again, thinking of gardening and flowers, God could have made 2 or 3 different kinds of flowers, but he didn't, because God is a God of beauty and magnificence and bounty that just overflows, and we see all the colors and all the variety that God has created, and we're like God in that way. We're artists. We paint. We make logos. Even the cross is a symbol, an image that brings things to our mind. There's rituals, and perhaps in your church there's an order of service, a way that you shape things, and there's intentionality with that. There's teaching that goes along with that as you order a service. The seasons, there's things that you do in the wintertime and at Christmas and in springtime and in the summertime, and those are human inventions in some sense. Language, we create language. We share meaning, we pass on meaning, we have new ideas. Or places, parks, roads, nations. Those are all inventions of human beings, and those are good things, because God has created us to be many creators, to follow in his footsteps, to be like him in that way. I like to think of God as the parent, and we're the little kid tagging along. I remember when my son Patrick was younger, whenever anything would break, I am not handy. Again, I'd rather be reading a book. And so when things break at the house, I'm frustrated because I'm not very good with a hammer and nails and screwdrivers and all that. But my son Patrick used to celebrate every time something broke, because he would get to watch me fix it and hang out with me and tell me how to do it. He had all kinds of insights. Dad, I think it's this. I'm like, no, it's not. But all right, so moving on to the next slide. Another important question. I think you should think about this. So are you a creator in using technology or a consumer? And I think that's a distinction that maybe we don't think about as much. So technology doesn't have to be bad. Technology can be a way that we manipulate the environment, that we manipulate tools, that we create something, that we are like God. But there's also can just be mindless consumption of media, mindless consumption of your time with no purpose or no intentionality, that you are the product. If you use social media, you're the product. You're a passive consumer. So God created us in his image to be like him, to function as rulers over creation. So as we use technology, are we a creator? Are we ruling? Or are we a consumer and being consumed? I think that might be an important distinction to think about as you evaluate your own use of technology, or as your children use technology. I don't think it's bad for your children to use new technologies. Making a video might be a wonderful way for them to manipulate an environment, to create something, to make a movie, to do those sorts of things. But see how very different that is from 4 hours of mindlessly watching YouTube. One is imaging God, in a sense. The other is mindless consumption. So not just thinking about, is technology good or bad, is YouTube good or bad, are videos good and bad, but how are you using it? Are you using it in a way that is fulfilling the way that God created us to be or not? So I'm going to kind of move through some scriptures here. So Genesis 1, next slide. And I'm short on time, so I am going to be short on explanation. Hopefully you can just kind of follow me. But God gave humans dominion. And I think you can kind of see a story of technology throughout the Bible in some sense at least. So then God said, Genesis 1:26-28, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion. And it lists all the areas that they're to have dominion. He creates them, and then he says to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. So when we rule over creation, when we subdue creation, when we take a rock and a stick and we make a hammer and we give it function, we are ruling over creation. We are right to do that. That is a good thing to do. When we see a horse and we think, oh, I can get from point A to point B in a better way, I'm giving this horse a new purpose, a new function. We are right to do that. That is ruling over creation. The problem is when creation rules over us. So are we ruling or are we being ruled? Are we creating or are we being consumed? I think those are good categories for us to use in evaluating our use of technology. Next slide. I'll move through this very quickly. But God makes man. He puts him into the garden. And in Genesis chapter 2, the purpose that we see, it's not the only purpose, but a purpose for God creating man is to till the garden. He created him to rule over the creation that he has just made. That's our purpose. We function as his representative there. I think this is interesting, next slide, that we see that when Adam and Eve sinned, they made something. This is kind of interesting. The text doesn't tell us how they did this, but they sewed fig leaves together and they made loincloths. So that takes several steps and tools, and I don't know what they used besides the fig leaves. Did they have a needle and thread? I don't know. But God improved it. God improved the technology. I would rather be clothed in wool than in fig leaves. That's just me. Maybe you have a different clothing preference. But God improved the technology that Adam and Eve had started. And as we see the story go, next slide, we see a lot of human innovation through the next chapters of Genesis. We see Abel is a keeper of the sheep. Cain is a worker of the ground. Noah plants a vineyard. Cain builds a city. And as you can see, some of these are good and some of these are bad. Or some of these go well and some of these do not. God tells Noah to make himself an ark. That's a lot of craftsmanship. That's technology. He used tools to do that. He didn't just push them together. We have the instruments being made of bronze and iron, instruments being made, musical instruments. And the next slide, we also have, as things disintegrate, going to Genesis chapter 11, the story of the Tower of Babel, where humans defy God. This is the story of technology, humans coming together to build a tower to the heavens, to defy God rather than spread out. So technology can be a way that we image God, that we fulfill the creation mandate, that we do what God has called us to do, that we are like God, or it can be a way that we defy God and make ourselves to be God. Next slide, just a couple of things on technology and redemption. There's good things. The building of the tabernacle, these are craftsmen, Bezalel and Aholiab. Jesus was a carpenter, also a craftsman. The spread of the gospel is heavily dependent on technologies, the ability to travel, the ability to communicate. The Bible in your hands, whether you realize it or not, you're not carrying scrolls, and that's a good thing. It's a lot easier to have a codex. Christians were the first to really widespread use of books. I think that's awesome. A book is technology. I'm anti-Kindle, but again, I'm a Luddite. So if you're using Kindle, I used it for like 2 years and then I gave up on it. I don't like it. But I won't judge you if you do. And then the mission, spread of the gospel, and even I think the interesting thing, and this is the name of the book that we're kind of reflecting on, from the garden to the city, that humans start in the garden, but we end in New Jerusalem. There's an interesting thing there. So 2 stories about technology. I'm going to wrap things up here. One is God moves the story. So in one story, there is a God who is moving humanity along a timeline. He has a purpose and a plan. There's an end point towards which he is moving all of history. Technology plays a role in this story, but it's a subservient role. It's a subservient role. It's not an ultimate one. The only true salvation offered to humanity comes from God himself and his son, Jesus Christ. Technology offers us a foretaste of the lasting healing God will bring, but we still wait for resurrection. It's not the solution to our problems, ultimately. But there's another story, and this is that we move the story. In this story, there is no God. There is only the advancement of life from simple to more complex through chance. This advancement was initially biological in nature, but now the primary means of progressing and advancing life is technological. If there is any salvation or any hope for the future, it will come through the advancement of technology. In this story, the primary problem we face is not sin, but the limitations of our carbon-based bodies. Our destiny is to transcend our weak biological bodies in order that we might be born again into eternal machines. It's a rejection of creation, a rejection of how God made us to be. Next slide. So a question I want you to ask yourself is, how are you being shaped by your tools? How are you being shaped by your tools? You may not think that you're shaped by a shovel, but if you use a shovel every day, your body will literally change. Your muscles will change. You'll develop new muscles. Your hands will change. You'll develop calluses on your hands. You'll be able to more effectively use the shovel, or more effectively use the hammer, or more effectively use an axe, or whatever the tool is. That's also true of digital tools. That's also true of digital tools. Our brains change, and you can see this as good or bad, or both. There have been studies done that show that younger people today are not as good as they used to be at memory, and maybe we would bemoan that, but they are much better at knowing how to retrieve information. Why is that? It's because of how they use different tools. Our brains are smart, believe it or not, and if we need them for certain things, they'll develop the pathways to be used for those things. So how we use tools will change our pathways. On a more negative account, the use of pornography will literally change the pathways in your brain if you use it on a consistent basis. How we use digital tools will shape us, just the way that physical tools may shape our hands and our muscles and our backs. The way that we use digital tools will shape our minds, our neural pathways, our memory. So next slide. So if you get one thing from today, technology is not neutral. It is not neutral. We're shaped and formed by the way that we use it. So the questions that we need to keep forefront in our minds are, who is shaping us? Because sometimes there are actual people behind the technologies. They have agendas for you, perhaps. So who is shaping us? And you can think of human agents and spiritual agents. How are we being shaped? I think those are questions that you should ask yourself, that if you have children, that you should be talking to your children about. How is this shaping you? What are you becoming? Who are we becoming? And to what are we being shaped? There's one thing I want you to get from today, is that technology is not neutral. So I don't have time to go through all of these verses, but I could give you this PowerPoint if you'd like. But I have lots of verses here of reflection, of thinking about how we're to present ourselves as a living sacrifice to God, to not be conformed to the world, but be transformed. So I'm going to leave those verses for now. Maybe we'll have time to get back to them. But at this point, we're going to have Richard's going to come up, and he's going to give us a little bit of talk on 12 ways that your phone is changing you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. As Matt said, I'm going to be talking to you about this book today, 12 Ways That Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Reinke, or Reinke, you can take your pick. Now, I know what you're thinking. You look like decent, good Christian people, and the way that you use your phones is always virtuous and good and helpful. And so you don't really need this seminar, but you might know someone, in your life who could benefit from this. So other than maybe Matt and David, you don't need this, but someone might. So you should still listen, because I'm noticing, because I came to use technology a little bit slowly and kicking and screaming at first, like Matt, that things are starting to be centralized more and more on these little rectangles that we carry around with us. And I remember specifically when I made the transition from a paper calendar, which used to be a thing, to calendar on my phone. And now I do my banking on my phone, right? My scheduling is on the phone. Almost everything can be done on the phone these days. So I wanted to read just a quick scripture just to kind of linger with you as we talk through this. And it's from 1 Corinthians chapter 10 in verse 31. Paul writes, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved." So I just want to echo Matt's point that we're trying to drive home and hammer home today, that technology is not neutral. And I'd say there's two reasons for that. One is, I was still on this slide, thanks. Technology is a good. It is a good that was built into creation by God through humanity to be used for good. So it has the capacity to be used for ill and for evil, but it wasn't intended to be. So that's one thing. It's not neutral, it's good. But then also, technology isn't neutral because it forms us. As we use it, as we create it, as we interact with it, it forms us. J.R. Tolkien said that we are sub-creators. And so we don't create ex nihilo like God does, but we create with what God has made. And he says it's because we're made in the image of a maker. So we're designed to use our innovative minds and our desire to improve things for good using technology. So just a quick note from the author of this book, that his intention, he says, is to find out what is the best use of my smartphone in the flourishing of my life. And he says technology is an extension of the self. It both shapes and reveals our hearts. So we're going to be reflecting on how we use our phones, how it changes us, and what it says about us as well. You can go to the first slide. So Brave New World is probably my favorite kind of classic dystopian novel by Aldous Huxley. And so a line from there is, technological progress has merely provided us with more efficient means for going backwards. The reason I like this book is it probably, of all these novels, most accurately portrays kind of the direction our culture is headed. And there was a guy named Neil Postman who wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he talks about this book and what it kind of predicts. He says, contrary to common belief among the educated, Huxley and George Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. So Orwell wrote 1984. You probably heard about it or read it. Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. But in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Next slide. Another book that I like, when we think about formation, is this by James Smith, You Are What You Love, The Spiritual Power of Habit. And so Smith writes, when we stop worrying about smartphones just in terms of content, what we're looking at, which can be a concern, and start to consider the rituals that tether us to them throughout the day, we'll notice that the very form of the practice comes loaded with an egocentric vision that makes me the center of the universe. And so Smith writes a lot about how either secular or sacred rituals and liturgies form us as people as we practice them, whether we're aware of it or not. Next slide. One more book that I used in my research that Matt gave me is this, Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other. And she says, we make our technologies and they in turn shape us. So of every technology, we must ask, does it serve our human purposes? A question that causes us to reconsider what these purposes are. Technologies in every generation present opportunities to reflect on our values and direction. I think this is a secular writer, but that's a profound insight that we should think about our human purposes and how our technologies interact with those and contribute to those or detract from them. Okay, next slide. So these are the chapters in the book. I'll just read them real quick. I'm going to highlight a few of them because we have limited time, but I would recommend the book. It's a good, it helps you think through these things and apply them practically to your own life, theologically understand them. So the first chapter is We're Addicted to Distraction. I'll talk about that one. 2, we ignore our flesh and blood. I'll talk about that one. 3, we crave immediate approval. It's not wrong to crave approval. Which of us doesn't want to hear one day from God, well done, good and faithful servant, come enter into your master's happiness. But we can sort of settle for lesser types of approval here and now, and they can be instantaneously sought with our phone that's always with us, and so that can become a problem. 4, we lose our literacy. That's a big one. I'll talk about that one. 5, we feed on the produced. 6, we become like what we like. 7, we get lonely. And I'm going to be doing another short talk later on the importance of relationships and how technology affect relationships and community. 8, we get comfortable in secret vices. 9, we lose meaning. 10, we fear missing out. 11, we become harsh to one another. And 12, we lose our place in time. So, next slide. The first one I want to talk about just a little bit is we're addicted to distraction. So, attention, as you probably know, is really one of the main currencies of relationship. So you know this with kids because kids crave your attention. Not just sort of part of your attention, but your full attention. And this is true of peer relationships as well. So when we're distracted, you have to think about where is your attention and where is it not? Because wherever your attention is, wherever you're giving your attention, that will grow. So the author took a survey of 8,000 Christians, and one of the results is that 73% said checking social media comes before any kind of spiritual discipline, prayer, devotional, anything like that on a typical morning. So you wake up in the morning, this is part of your morning ritual, maybe your phone wakes you up because it has an alarm, and you have to check in what's happening on social media, and that comes first as the priority. I could probably guarantee that most of these survey participants would not say that social media is a higher priority than God to them, and yet it comes before in that ritual. A psychologist from the California State University of Fullerton, Ofer Turl, warns that those addicted to checking Facebook, unlike compulsive drug abusers, have the ability to control their behavior, but they don't have the motivation to control this behavior because they don't see the consequences to be that severe. So I would say there's a different kinds of control, different levels of control. And with Facebook, there's not even really a resistance. There's not even really an attempt to rein that instinct in because it's thought of as harmless. It's thought of as kind of an innocent thing, which it can be. But just no kind of check on it, no kind of boundary, no limits on it can lead to greater and greater use, greater and greater consumption in that media. The appeal of distractions also is that they keep responsibilities, people, thoughts of eternity away, our mortality, things that are unpleasant to face. Distractions can kind of be a little escape from that. And if we're always distracted, we're always escaping from things that really do matter very deeply. And I work as a therapist, and so I help people try and face things that are difficult to face. And oftentimes that involves a turning away from distractions and a turning toward truly meaningful and deep things of life, even when they're hard. Unchecked distractions affect our spiritual lives. Obviously, they can make it harder to notice God's presence and hinder our communion with God. Okay, next slide. Next, we ignore our flesh and blood. This is a big one. So we're people of flesh and blood, and when everything happens on a screen, it almost changes the way we function. So this first point I have that you'll probably be aware of, because you probably have interacted with it, if not participated, is that we're more likely to bubble with rage towards others, screen to screen instead of face to face. And researchers call this phenomenon anonymous anger. So angry expressions online are often reinforced, too, by the engagement they generate, right? And engagement is like a way to measure how much purchase something is getting as far as visibility, which then gets monetized because these sites are now, reinforcing whatever gets the most attention. And if you think about it, the controversy, the harshness gets a lot more attention than a kind word, a nuanced discussion. Okay, good. And one other thing I wanted to say about that, quote from Reinke's book, another one: if anger is the viral emotion of online disembodiment, and this is not on the slide, but then joy is the Christian emotion of embodied fellowship. So John, the Apostle John, closed one of his ancient handwritten letters with a line of enduring relevance to those of us who now write with our thumbs. He says, John, in 2 John, in chapter 12, though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink, which is modern technology for John. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face, so that our joy may be complete. Now, obviously, John is not against using the technology of writing, but he highlights this difference, that being face-to-face with someone is a closer connection, and it leads to greater joy. And it's been suggested that, if social media, you had to actually, use your real name, and you had to see someone's face, and it was maybe someone that you might run into in the neighborhood, you might just interact a little bit differently than if it's just some anonymous person with a fake name and a little avatar. Next point here, in the smartphone age, when our cognitive actions are separated from our bodily presence, and we become kind of an avatar on our phones, we tend to over-prioritize the relatively easy interactions in the disembodied online world and undervalue the embodied nature of the Christian faith. So I'll talk more about this later, but we are made to share embodied fellowship and community with other believers. Problem with that is that real community, real fellowship is fraught with all kinds of difficulties. It's messy, it's awkward, it can be unpleasant. Some people are just difficult to get along with, and you have to be willing to be uncomfortable to foster real, meaningful relationships. Whereas online, you can just kind of pick and choose the things that are kind of work well, the people that you agree with, the people that like you, and you can just kind of like bottleneck with those interactions. One more thing there, from Tony Reinke. He says, it's not on the slide, but he says, we are not technology, we are not smooth, clean, indestructible, like man-made crystal. No, we are easily scratched, we are born broken, we are dust and water, chemicals and germs, and everywhere we go, we leave oily blots on everything we touch. We smudge technology because we are not machines. We are creatures made in the image of the Supreme Creator, who we are made to share embodied joy together in His name. There was a line in Chesterton's short book on Thomas Aquinas where he's comparing Aquinas with St. Francis, and he's talking about how, Aquinas is this very logical figure, and then Francis is kind of passionate, minister of faith. And he says, Francis is the kind of person who, although he loves green fields, he doesn't let the grass grow underneath his feet. And Chesterton writes that the Americans might describe him using a metaphor like that he's a live wire, because he's always on the move. And Chesterton says, it's interesting that when modern people want to describe something alive, that they use something dead and mechanical to describe it. And Chesterton writes that there is such thing as a live worm, there's not such thing as a live wire. So Francis would have been happy to accept that he's a worm, but he's a very live worm. So we could be I would rather be a live worm than just a mechanical version of myself. Okay, next slide. Okay, we lose our literacy. For those of us that like to read, even if you prioritize reading, you might notice your habits, including your phone use, inhibiting that, whether it's with time, with attention, your attention span. Our attention spans are shorter. In the same survey that the author took, he found that majority of those sampled read fewer books due to habitual smartphone use. Our apps and social media all compete for our attention, the cost of sustained focus we need to read books. And this is David Brooks, New York Times. He says, "This is because texts, snaps, and tweets are part of an endless cocktail party of multiple conversations. And have you ever tried to read in the middle of a party?" I remember I downloaded a language app because I wanted to learn Italian. And I was enjoying it, but it was helpful. But the way that the language app functioned is it was always trying to get my attention. Come in, you need to practice more, you need to do this, you're down on the list, you don't have enough points. So it was just demanding my attention so much, I just had to delete it. So I think there's a lot on our phones that notify us, that ding at us, that want our attention. And so to give the kind of a sustained focus to dwell on a text, whether it's the Word of God or a good book, is less likely in this world. One study showed that digital readers, which I read some things digitally, I prefer the written page, but digital readers usually skim too quick to retain information, while readers of print naturally linger more on a text. And one more line from the book that's not on this slide. Reinke writes, "Social media are far too new, too contemporary, too close, too much like me to tap into the greatest benefits of literacy. To be changed and challenged, we need the clean sea breeze of old books," said C.S. Lewis. "We need the life-giving gust of the Spirit in the ancient book. And when it comes to serious literacy, the faithful church is counterculturally positioned for success because solid expositional preaching is essentially a model of healthy, slow reading." So reading isn't the be-all, end-all, but I mean, the kind of attention that reading requires is good for us. To dwell with a text, to linger with a text, to be able to retain something that we're reading. Smartphones tend to hinder that. Okay, almost time for dinner. Next slide. Okay, so we have, that's all the slides I have from that book. We have some discussion questions up. I'm going to read them real quick, and you're going to have time to get some food and maybe talk about these questions a little bit. Matt might ask, what you came up with when he comes back up to present the next talk. But what are some ways that you have been blessed by modern technology? I think you could probably think of a few. Matt mentioned being able to communicate with people who are in a different part of the world, at the touch of a button. I think that's a huge blessing. How has it made your life easier, richer, and more joyful? So we are not here to bash technology or to characterize it in only a negative light. We want you to think about what have been the good ways that God has blessed us with our ability to create, use technology. And then what are some ways that modern technology has made your life more difficult, maybe less flourishing? Have there been ways in which you felt it has made you less rich, your life less rich, less joyful? You might have, it might be interesting to think about the difference between like a deep, abiding joy and a momentary kind of fleeting, a little thrill of pleasure, because I think there are different versions of happiness and joy. And so, two basic, simple categories of questions there. But I think you could probably think of things in each category where technology has really blessed your lives, and where technology has maybe sent you in a wrong way and shaped you in a wrong way. So we'll talk more about that, but I'm going to now, if we're ready. Yeah, Diane, please.
trying to get rocking and rolling here again. So all the bad kids talking while class is going. We're ready to move on. So if I could, just for a couple minutes, even if you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing, you were talking to your neighbor about other things. Let's pretend that you talked about the discussion questions at least. What are some things, I know it's probably kind of hard for me to hear you from your table, so you might have to talk loudly, but what are some things that you thought about of how technology has blessed your life, enriched your life, made life easier, more joyful? I liked how Richard kind of framed that, joy versus just pleasure or temporary happiness. I think joy is a good thing, right? So what are some ways that you've been blessed by technology, it's enriched your life, made it more joyful? Anybody? GPS. You know, that is one of the most common answers that people give, GPS. And yeah, I resisted the smartphone for a long time. I have one now. GPS makes it hard to ever go back. It really does. I get that, yeah. Yes. Yeah, you know, glasses, hearing aids. You know, sometimes Christians worry about, and I think rightfully so don't hear me wrong, things like transhumanism, if you know what that means, like incorporation of tech into our bodies. But in some ways, we've already done that to good effect, right? A pacemaker is in some sense incorporation of technology into our bodies, and I think that's a good thing, right? It's restorative. Glasses. I'm just starting to have to wear glasses when I read, which is a bummer, but it's good. I can still read. So yeah, it can be restorative. What are some other ways that technology has enriched your life, made it easier, more joyful?
Testimonies. God moving in so many different
Yes.
ways, and you relate to them, and they give you a greater joy. You don't hear that if you,
Yeah.
unless you do. So those kind of things.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you couldn't hear her, she said testimonies, knowing how God is working around the world, around the country, and other people that you may not know otherwise. Good. What are some other ways that technology has blessed your life, enriched your life, made it more joyful?
FaceTiming family on the East Coast.
Yeah, FaceTiming family on the East Coast. My parents live in Virginia, and so my children still have a relationship with them, which is wonderful. Or travel, if flying on an airplane, I can get there in 5.5 hours. That's a lot better than a covered wagon. It really is. So, good. What are some other ways that technology has enriched your life, made it more joyful? Yes, sir.
Surgical technology.
Absolutely. Surgical technology. Yes, sir. Refrigeration. I agree with that too. Awesome. Good. Anybody else?
The ability to have a 24-week baby born.
Yes. That is a wonderful answer. A 24-week baby, that would never have happened. When my daughter was born, she's 6 now, she did this rascally thing of flipped over the day before she was born. Like we checked her the day before, she was right side up. She flipped the next day, so we had to have an emergency C-section. But with technology, it wasn't that big of a deal. It had been 100 years ago. I might have lost my wife and my daughter, right? So the technology can be a wonderful, beautiful, restorative thing of reversing evil or preventing evil and harm and pain. Absolutely. Anybody else held technology, maybe particularly on the more joyful? I think that's a little harder. So anybody, how has technology made your life more joyful? Ordering groceries. Who wants to go to the store, right? I'm trying to break my addiction to Amazon because I feel like I don't want to support my overlords anymore. But yeah, it's very convenient. I'd rather do my Christmas shopping on Amazon than go to Target, or the mall. Okay, good. Anybody else? All right, one or two more. Yeah.
Access to all sorts of Christian music.
Yeah. Can you imagine having to make your own music to listen to music? Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I saw a hand somewhere over here. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yep. It's because they don't answer their phone. You know, my wife saw this thing she told me about of this girl who they were trying to call the cell phone of one of their kids, right? from the car, and they weren't answering. So they had to go all the way home to get them. And the daughter was like, you know what they need to invent, Mom? They need to invent a phone that's just in the house, that it would call everybody in the house. And it wasn't just like for any particular person. She's like, there used to be such a thing. Right. All right. Anybody that's burning to answer that question, or I'm going to move to the next one. Okay, so what are some ways that modern technology has made your life more difficult, has made your life less rich, or less joyful? Yes, sir.
So I like photography and making videos of that. And with the internet, I can immediately find, if I say I take a picture of something I'm really happy with, it's a great picture, I can immediately go online and I can find the best picture of the world of that thing, which is always so much better than mine. It takes away the joy.
Yeah, the comparative. And that's something I hear from teenagers a lot, is the anxiety that goes with a constant comparison that they always are feeling. And that can happen to us too. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, just the constant exposure to the blatant evils and wrongs of the world.
Yes.
Media platforms. It's in your face.
Yeah. The awareness, we were talking about how aware we are of information, and that sounds like a great thing. It can be overwhelming too. Or the angst that a lot of people feel, including myself sometimes, of there's all these issues that I'm supposed to care about, but how can I care about all of them? Right? How can I respond to all of them? Yeah.
Or even just the individual person ranting into their phone with a video that pops up, and it's like, I don't really want to care about
That. Yeah. Yeah, it's just everywhere. You can't get away from it. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It is. Yeah, it is really hard. And you can't keep up with all of it, right? Good. Yeah.
The ability of lying and false information.
Yeah. And how do you know what is true sometimes, right? These people are saying this, these people are saying this, and maybe we pick the sources we listen to, but that puts us more and more in little bubbles, perhaps. Yeah, absolutely. One or two more, if anybody. What are some ways that technology has made your life less joyful? Yeah. Yeah. This is. I don't know if this is how you're meaning it, but in jobs, a lot of times, you never really get off. It used to be you got off of work at a certain time, and now they expect you to answer the phone on Saturdays and at 7 p.m. or whatnot. Absolutely. Good. Yeah, for me as a teacher, when we went for COVID, oh my goodness. So I don't know if you know what Microsoft Teams is, but Microsoft Teams is a platform. So because kids weren't on campus, we had to have ways of communicating with them. Well, all of a sudden I found myself on Microsoft Teams at 7 p.m. or at 5 p.m. or at 6 p.m. And the expectation was they're working on their homework. You're supposed to help them. They need help because they're not seeing you during the day. It's actually somewhat reasonable. I'm not criticizing, but you do need time that you're off, right? And your family needs your attention. And so sometimes technology just enables the world to just invade, your work to invade, those sorts of things. All right, anybody else? How technology has made life more difficult, less joyful? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you were speaking of Microsoft Teams, so when you go to a meeting in Teams, you can't see the person's face, what kind of expressions they're saying, what they might be saying to somebody off camera. You have no idea. In a regular meeting, you can figure that out, and the dynamics change a lot.
Yeah, they do. And that can be more difficult for some people to deal with. Good. I thought I saw another hand, but maybe I didn't. All right, anybody else? Say that again. And you mean that is a less joyful thing? Why? Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a real temptation for us. And it's worth saying. It's more difficult now to resist a lot of temptations than it was 50 years ago. It truly is. Okay, so next slide. So I'm going to be talking just briefly, and I had some papers passed out. I grossly underestimated how many of you there would be, so I printed 50 copies. The reason I wanted to have some papers in front of you is I don't really have a lot of time to go over everything, but I do think this would be worth spending some time reflecting on yourself, on your own. So this is a book, it was a New York Times bestseller, I read it a year or two ago, called Digital Minimalism. It's not a beating up on technology book, and it's not a Christian book, but choosing focused life in a noisy world. And kind of his main point is that we should use technology in accordance with our values rather than just it's available, so use it. Well, I think that's very compatible with a Christian worldview. What are our values? It might be different than Cal Newport's, but I do think that we should have a value-centric approach to how we use technology. I would endorse reading this book, finding this book, thinking about this book. I'm not going to endorse every single chapter and sentence in it, but I do think it would be helpful for you to think through your practices and how you use technology. So I have next slide. Is it okay? I don't know. Yeah, it's a little hard to read. I do have a couple of verses here to think about. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. So I'm not trying to take a legalistic approach of don't do this and don't do this and do this, but I do think there's a wisdom in asking, is this helpful? All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. So all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but I will not be dominated by anything. What is dominating you? What is taking control of your attention and your time? Is it actually helping you? And you might think it is, but maybe it isn't. And that would be worth considering. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23, he's kind of coming back around to the same thought from a different direction. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So thinking about how you use technology, is it building others up or tearing them down? Is it making the world better? Speaking of Twitter, you're braver than I am. I've tried to use Twitter. I just find it so toxic. I can't use it. But I'm sure there's a lot of really good things on Twitter and a lot of great conversations and a lot of good ways to, I'm just too much of a wimp to use it. But not all things are helpful. And if you ever go, I used to do this. I've tried not to do this anymore. If you read news articles online, if you want to get a bad view of the world, just scroll down to the comments section and read things that people would never say to other people in real life, and you could be really shocked at that might be your neighbor or the person, hopefully not the person sitting next to you. And then Exodus 20, this may seem like a weird verse to bring up in terms of technology, but I don't think so. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, or your son, or your son, or your daughter, your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the Sabbath day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Are you allowing yourself to rest? God designed you that way. Are you allowing yourself to rest? Oh, it doesn't say anything about your wife. Oh, interesting. You know, I wasn't expecting that comment, but I will make one real quick thinking, I'm forgetting where it is, but it's somewhere in the Old Testament law, that it specifically specifies that you will not to build a fire on the Sabbath day, which seems kind of like a weird rule. Like, okay, why not a fire? But I think that the purpose of that is because building fires is what you do when you cook. And I think that was intentionally to give women a Sabbath day. But that's my best answer I got off the top of my head. Unless this is talking to women too. Maybe that's the answer. Thank you for that. All right, next slide. So some self-reflection. You can answer this out loud, but I want you to think first. What struggles have you or those close to you had with technology use? And we were talking about how it's blessed or enriched your life or not. But in what ways has technology been a hindrance to your work life, your family life, or your spiritual life? what excuses, this is what I really want you to think about, what excuses have you used to continue to use technologies that have been problematic? Are there excuses? I know this technology is a problem, but if I got rid of it, I couldn't fill in the blank. Or I really need it to fill in the blank. So that's the part I really want to focus on. What excuses do you use to continue to use technologies that you can actually identify this is a problem? Anybody want to be brave on that? You don't I don't expect tons of hands. Maybe this takes more thinking. But anybody want to, what are some excuses we might use to use technologies that we've already identified? Yeah, this is kind of a problem in my life. Yeah. Yeah, that was part of Richard's thing, the fear of missing out, the 12 FOMO. There's a abbreviation. Did you have your hand up?
Sometimes I could tell myself that playing a mindless game like merging things
Mm-hmm.
is it's just an easy way to have downtime.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that sometimes it makes me late to things because I just want to do just one more.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to give a brief commercial for another book here. This isn't a Christian book either, but Bored and Brilliant, how spacing out can unlock your most productive and creative self. And she was a journalist, if I remember right, had a baby, had to kind of stop working for a while, and really struggled mentally in a lot of ways. But one thing that she did some study and some thinking on is how your brain works, is your brain needs rest and downtime, right? You need some space where you're not thinking. It's the whole adage, right? You have your best ideas in the shower. Why? Because there's nothing else going on. Your brain kind of rests, wanders, and you're not, unless you're bringing your phone into the shower, which I don't know, maybe they can do that these days, I don't know. But you're giving yourself some space. But what oftentimes we do is what we think is restful actually isn't. We fill all the little crevices of downtime. And that's one of the interesting things with cell phone apps or cell phone games especially, is that you don't think they're doing that much because it's just 5 minutes at a time. But, you're in the elevator, or you're waiting for the light, or whatever, or it's passing period at school. But if every single little moment of your day is being filled up, which your brain needs to rest and not be engaged, you're working it in different ways. And what you might be doing to rest might actually be exhausting you, and you don't realize it. And I think that's something to consider. So thank you for that. I wasn't planning on a commercial, but there you go. Anybody else? What are some excuses that maybe you give? Yeah.
Yeah, this is similar, but since I have my phone with me, I'd always be listening to a sermon or a podcast.
Spiritual. Yeah.
Growing spiritually, but there's always noise.
Yeah.
There was never silence.
Right. And this might be a common one, and maybe this is an older one. Maybe people are smarter than I was then. But I kept Facebook for a long time. I quit, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. It's been a while. But I kept Facebook for a long time because I didn't want to lose all these relationships. Right? These are people I care about. But I honestly didn't care about all 400 of them. Right? I didn't care about all 400 of them. But I remember thinking, okay, so which are the ones I really do want to keep up with that I would lose with Facebook? And some of them were friends in other countries. One particular one was my uncle, who is a pastor in Montana. And we connected and talked on Facebook from time to time. And so I just kept having that excuse, right? But what I've replaced it with, and this goes along with the digital minimalism book, is, okay, I'm using technology. I Skype with my friends overseas once a month instead of connecting them with Facebook. Which is better connection? Actually, the Skyping once a month is better than every single day on Facebook, and probably less time. I see my uncle once a year. I go camping with my children, and I drive through Montana, and I see him every year. Now, that may not work for everybody, but that once a year, couple of days with my uncle is way better than 365 days on social media. It really is. And so the question here, and this is kind of the question of the book, is maybe you're using technology to connect with people, and you really are, But are you using the right technology or the best way? Let's say that you went through your Facebook friends and found 8 friends that you really wanted to keep up with. If you called them on the phone once a month and talked to them for 30 minutes, that would be a total of 4 hours a month. And you would probably have a better connection with those friends and keep up with them better than you do all the hours and hours and hours that you spend on social media. That's really the essence of the book that I'm advertising, is to think critically and intentionally and be in control of your technology use and consumption rather than the reverse. Remember, we're creators, not consumers. We're in the image of God and we rule, but we're not dominated or ruled over. God set us over creation, not creation over us. I think one of the more interesting things, Genesis chapter 3 is such a profound chapter of the Bible. You can just read it and get the main gist. There's so many little things that are going on there. But if you notice, we always talk about it's Satan who tempts Eve. It's not what it says in the text. I think it's Satan, but it's not what it says in the text. Anybody remember what it says in the text, what it calls? A serpent, but something else. A beast of the field, which we just had Adam and Eve being told to rule over the beasts of the field and under God. So God, Adam and Eve, beasts of the field. What happens in temptation? Beasts of the field, Adam and Eve, God. Right? It's a reversal. They were to rule over the beasts of the field, but instead of the beasts of the field are ruled over by them. Same thing with technology. We should rule over technology. It's a way that we are imaging God. It should not rule over us. I think that's maybe a good principle to think of. Okay, I don't have any more slides for this. I think, or maybe I have one more, I don't remember, but we'll leave it for now. So, Bill Maher is not usually an ally, if you know who that is. You guys don't know who Bill Maher is? Okay, he's not very friendly towards Christians. But I like this quote from him. A broken clock is still right twice a day. But the tycoons of social media have to stop pretending that they're friendly, nerdy gods building a better world and admit that they're just tobacco farmers in t-shirts selling an addictive product to children. Because face it, checking your likes is the new smoking. Philip Morris wanted your lungs. The App Store wants your soul. I think that's actually pretty good. So another book, I don't have time to go into a lot, but Adam Alter, again, this isn't a Christian book, but Irresistible, The Rise of Addictive Technology and the Business of Keeping Us Hooked. Because there actually are people behind some of these things, and they make a lot of money by how much time you use their apps. They really do. So after studying the impact of new technologies on behavior addiction, this was his PhD thesis, 2 things became clear to him. New technologies are particularly well suited to foster behavior addictions, and these features are not accidents, but they are carefully engineered design features. So he talks about how some of them have studied things that are used in Vegas slot machines, for instance. And in Vegas, if they're not allowed to change the odds of you winning. They used to. They're not allowed to do that because it leads to addiction. They know those things. But they still have little ways of getting around that. So if you're out on Vegas slot machine, for instance, and you lose again and again and again and again, they know you'll get up and leave eventually. But they make the most money by how much time you spend at the slot machine. So what do? Well, they build lots of little wins in that are basically worthless, but they light up and make big noise and lots of lights that hits the dopamine cycles in your brain. They do that. So a lot of little wins that really don't mean anything. It's actually very easy if you have 5 in a row kind of slots that you're trying to get, very easy to get 4 in a row. It's designed for you to get 4 in a row pretty often. So you feel like, I'm so close, like next time I'll get it, but you're not really close at all. They know that. They also are keeping track, and they know when you've lost a lot, and they'll come bring you a beer or an appetizer. And I go, I just got something. Or if you lose lots of money, they send you comps. Like Vegas has these things, right, built in that they're not allowed to do certain things, but they give you rewards to keep you at the machine because the more time you're on the machine, the more that you win. Well, there have been a lot of apps who apply those principles. But the thing is, there's no rules about it. There's no rules about it. And they know how your brain has worked. They've studied how your brain works and designed their app to hack it. A lot of them have done it. There is a story in the book about this guy, I forget the name of the app, I didn't write it down, sorry. But he made this app that went viral, and he made tons of money off of it, but he just kept getting these messages from people telling him how he's wrecked their life, and he felt terrible and deleted the app. Okay, I don't know if he gave away the money, I don't know, but this is a very real feature. People are doing this, they're making money off of it, and they're doing it really, many of them, on purpose. If you have notes, I'm going to skip to the next page here. I'm going to eat on Richard's time here too. So digital minimalism is a philosophy of technology use in which you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support things you value and then happily miss out on everything else. You're asking, what do I actually need? What is actually the best way of using technology? It's a value-centric method. So if a new technology offers little more than a minor diversion or trivial convenience, then the minimalist will ignore it. Or even if a new technology promises to support something that you value, it must pass a stricter test. Is this the best way to use technology to support this value? Let's think of news and keeping up on things. How many of you keep up on news online? Like you're reading news online. That's the way I often do it. But a question to ask then is kind of scrolling through all these sites or social media, sometimes where you get news or apps, is that the best way to be informed? Or is actually maybe an older technology, like subscribing to, I used to subscribe to The Economist, for instance. I tend to like British news better than American news because I'm weird. But is maybe subscribing to a magazine, or maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 sites that you check once a week, or you sign up for an email that sends you kind of a digest of what's going on. There may be other ways of keeping up where you'll be more informed, better informed, than just this constant stream of information that you get from all these sources. So that's kind of the method, is to think what is not just, I want to be informed, so I'll use all these different ways of being informed. What's the best way of being informed? What's the best way of keeping up this value? And these other things that are demanding my attention are actually detractive. Something that's becoming increasingly noticed is our attention crisis. And some of you mentioned that, there's just so much demand for our attention. Even driving down the road, the billboards, right? And they're flashy and they're big. You only have so much attention that you can give. You do not have an unlimited amount of attention. And so there's all sorts of things competing for you to give your attention to it. So shouldn't you be intentional on where your attention goes and think critically about that? Clutter is costly. More is not better. If there's a limited amount of attention you can give, then you are losing things the more you add. So what are you losing? So optimization is important. So thinking about how you use the technology. So think about social media, for instance. Social media is actually a wonderful tool. It really is. There are some great ways to use social media. I told you my wife's really into gardening. She did a plant sale, and she used Facebook Marketplace to advertise her plants. She's connected with other people making not making plants, but growing things, right? So those sorts of things. And she's connected with nurseries and businesses where she will sell her plants to. She uses it as a tool, and it's a very effective tool. Social media is a very effective tool. But I promise, it's really crummy entertainment. It's really crummy. There's a lot of things a lot more entertaining. Maybe you disagree with me, but 3-4 hours, I think there's more fun things that you could be doing. So is it good entertainment? Probably not. Is it a good tool? Yeah. So how you use the technology. It's not just saying social media is bad. It's saying what's the most effective way to use it. How should we use it? So he recommends, and I'm going to end here soon because Richard needs to come up here, but to put aside a 30-day period where you take a break from optional technologies in your life. You might need to use email. Your job might require email. So this is not asking you, okay, no more email. But what are the things that you really don't have to use that you think are entertaining or you might think are helpful? Take them away and do something else with your time. Do something that maybe you've lost over the years, like take up a hobby, paint, read a book. Maybe more time on spiritual disciplines. Maybe give up social media and pray the first thing in the morning. Read your Bible, those sorts of things. So for every technology, as you come out of this period, so you take a break from a technology, so you then reintroduce these technologies based on the value that it serves. And having a break from it helps you know what the value is. So think about, what did I lose by not using this? And if it's nothing, give it up, which is pretty much what I did with Facebook. And that may not be your decision, but that was mine. I have some notes there that will help you think through those things. And you can use those if you have a copy. If not, I can get them to you. And then on the back page, if you have the notes there, some practices. Spend some time alone. You really do need alone time. We do need that as human beings. But I don't think scrolling on apps is truly alone and truly restorative and refreshing. You may think it is, but you're cluttering your brain. So leave your phone at home. Go on a long walk. Start journaling. Start writing. Try it. So you spend however much time, maybe you only spend 20 minutes a day on a certain app. Give it up and spend those 20 minutes journaling. Spend those 20 minutes writing. Spend those 20 minutes picking up an instrument that you used to play. Those sorts of things. Another thing, I'm not going to highlight all of these, but don't click like. That may seem like I think the like button is one of the worst things ever invented. It trains your brain to accept absolute minimal connection as reasonable to real connection. What does a like really mean? But then we become addicted to them. We need this affirmation all the time. I only got 13 likes and they got 37. Oh no. So those consolidate texting. My wife did this. I thought it was kind of interesting. She customized her phone on a do not disturb so that if I called her or texted her or 2 or 3 other people, it would come through, but not everybody else. And then at the end of the day, if she wants to look at them all, she can. But rather than being distracted all the time, there might be ways that you can use your technology to get back some of your attention. You can use technology in those restorative ways. I'll let you browse the rest of that, but just at the end here, what are some of those practices that you can implement? Which do you want to, but not sure that you can? Maybe spend some time thinking about, I don't think I can do this. Maybe you can. Maybe there are ways you can use the technology differently or better. It's more restorative, leaves more of your attention, and you can focus on other things. So I am over my time, so I'm going to turn it over to Richard to talk about connections and relationships.
Thank you, Matt. Matt does such a great job. I hate to interrupt his talk to come do mine. In my haste, last time I came up here, I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Richard Price, and I work for Sunset Bible Church, providing pastoral care to our congregation. And I also am a therapist. I have a private practice in Gig Harbor, and so I meet with clients and help them as best I can, as God enables me, with a variety of different challenges. And one of the things I hear from people quite often is that they're lonely. They're disconnected from just about everyone except for maybe their nuclear family, whoever's in the household they might have some interaction with, but then isolated other than that. And I also see the kind of devastating emotional, spiritual effect that has on people when they open up about it in my office. I was thinking about, David mentioned earlier that he was taking was it a fast from Twitter? Fast from Twitter, okay, which is good. I like disciplines like that, and Matt mentioned some to take like a digital fast of some kind, whether it's from social media or from other forms of technology. And so what I want to talk to you about a little bit more is, what do you fill up that time that has been freed up, that space in your life? So yes, maybe we remove something because we're constantly feeling like we're busy, we're being pulled in different directions, we're constantly distracted. So if we were to clear out some of that clutter from our lives, maybe some of that negativity sometimes that's kind of taken to us to a more gloomy place, what is it that we replace that with? And I think one of the best things we can prioritize if we have more capacity, more bandwidth, if you want to use a tech metaphor, is relationships. And so if you go to the next slide, thanks guys, and next one. This first is a verse from 1 John, just very simple. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. I was thinking about this, and this is obvious. We all know this as Christians, but the way that you love is in the context of relationships. If you're just sort of sitting at home in your room and feeling good vibes of love towards others, which is easy, right? Warm, fuzzy feelings, that's not really loving them. And if you just sort of love the mass of faceless humanity, again, you're not real. If you feel like you love them, that's nice, but you're not really loving them until you get into a relationship with them. Then you can prioritize their good, their well-being. You can think what leads to their flourishing, what leads to their blessing, and how can I contribute to that? And so love happens in relationships. So just a couple quotes here to get us started. I want to think about how our relationships are affected by technology and how we can give more of ourselves to meaningful relationships. So again, Sherry Turkle from this book, Alone Together, she says, technology is seductive when what it offers meets our human vulnerabilities. And as it turns out, we are very vulnerable indeed. We are lonely, but fearful of intimacy. Digital connections and the sociable robot may offer the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. Our networked life allows us to hide from each other, even as we are tethered to each other. We'd rather text than talk. And I like texting fine. Sometimes I'd rather text than talk. But we were talking earlier about how your boss, your job, they can get a hold of you. They can reach you anywhere. Their tentacles could come into every part of your life through your phone. So you can't get away in some sense, but in another way, you don't really see each other, right? What you're getting is just a little representation of what someone says. And that might not even be an authentic representation at times. So you're not really getting a real person all the time when you're interacting digitally. Sometimes you could be, but more often than not, you're getting whatever they want to show you. Think of Instagram posts that have been, professionally edited and just completely changed and transformed from what the actual reality is like. This next one is from our previous text, 12 Ways. Smartphones and social media were supposed to cure the epidemic of loneliness. We would all be connected, all together, all the time. And none of us would ever feel alone. But the harsh truth is that we can always be lonely, even in a crowd. And maybe you felt that. And now even more so in a digital crowd. You remember when the lockdowns were in full swing during COVID, we were often told, well, it's okay, you can still meet together. You could just have a sort of a digital meeting. You could go on Zoom and have like a dinner date, or you could have a party on Zoom, and it's just as good, right? Win-win. And if you tried that, nothing against Zoom, but there is something very different about it. And once you let's say you lose your Wi-Fi goes out or something, the people just disappear, right? Or once the time is over, you just click a button and it's like, did we really even connect at all? And so we're going to talk about, I want to hear from you too about how can we shift our attention from some of the digital means of engagement to some more personal means of engagement. So we already talked about how technology is a good created by God, given to us by God for a good purpose. Also, though, we are created as relational beings by a triune God who's existed eternally in relationship. Genesis 2:18 reads, it is not good that the man should be alone. There's God declaring that for Adam, by himself is not as good as Adam with a companion. And so even if you're more of an introvert, maybe more of a solitary person, more of an introspective, maybe you think of yourself as a loner or a hermit of some kind, even you are better when you're connected to other people. So if we're made for relationship and technology is a good, how can we how can these two things coexist in our lives with value? So go to the next slide, and we'll just do part of these discussion questions together. So the first one I like, it's kind of like an earlier question, but more specific. How is your ability to cultivate relationships improved with the advent of new technology? And please just raise your hand or shout out. I'd love to hear specifically relationally, how has technology helped? Yes, Diane.
It helps grandparents whose grandkids live far away.
Grandparents love technology. They do. That's right. Yes?
I'm going back a little for technology. The invention of the transistor.
Sure. Transistor radio. Right. And how did that help?
How you can listen to things.
Right? Yeah, I mean, you could tune in and you could listen to what someone was saying. Right? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Anything else you can think of that has helped you connect? Yes, over here.
Made the organization of real-life events so much faster.
So when you're planning for an event like this one, you can actually put it together more efficiently using technology. Absolutely, that's correct. Yeah, that would be, I think, a wise use of technology that prioritizes community. Yeah. Any others? Okay, the next question, I just want to look at maybe the first half of the question. What qualities make human relationships real and meaningful? So just put technology aside for a second. What makes a friendship a good friendship? What makes a marriage a good marriage? What makes a family relationship a close family relationship? What are the qualities that we look for and hope for and benefit from? Yeah, Margie. Oh, vulnerability. Yeah, that's a tough one. But it's connecting, isn't it? If you're sharing, or if you're letting someone share, you're listening to really the deep things, you're connecting and bonding through that. Absolutely. Yes?
Conversation/communication.
Okay, so conversation, communication, it's hard to have a really flourishing, good relationship without that, right? Yeah, over here.
Touch. I think it's really taken away from a lot, that's why there's so many people lonely.
Human touch. Yeah.
Old people, they need to be felt.
Absolutely. Touch. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good one. Yeah. And Paul says we should greet one another with a holy kiss. And you might want to ask before you greet your neighbor with a holy kiss, but I almost would prefer that to never connecting with another person through touch. So yeah, absolutely. But a handshake is fine. If you're not into massages, like my friend Matt, he's not into massages, then don't ask before you massage Matt's shoulders. He's not going to like it. Yeah, touch, absolutely. Any others? Yes?
Some amount of reciprocity, not just one-sided.
Oh, yes. That's a good one. Reciprocity, mutuality, give and take. Yeah, if one person is putting all the effort into it, is it really a good relationship then? Yeah.
I think both similarity and difference. You have to have something in common,
Yeah.
but you don't want the same person. You need someone different.
Yeah, that's so good. So you need to share something. You need something to share, for sure. But if you're just exactly alike, then you can't really, that's not very interesting. So yeah, absolutely. Similarity and difference. Any others? Yes?
Being able to speak to my friends or my high school friends over 50 years ago, and I can still connect with them.
Oh, yeah. So longevity or consistency? Yeah, regularity. I mean, extended over time. What would you say? Perseverance? I mean, yeah. Continuity? Absolutely. Yeah, and that takes loyalty. It takes engagement. Absolutely. Yeah. Over here.
Maybe somewhat related to touch, nonverbal communication. I found it very hard to lead a team during the pandemic because,
right? Absolutely, yeah, nonverbal, I mean, body language, tone, all these little things we notice when we're in person, face to face with each other. I mean, we're always communicating, aren't we, even when we're not talking. And without that, it's hard to really connect. That's so good, yeah. Yes? Constructive empathy. Yeah, say more.
No, basically, when you're on Facebook and you say something bad has happened to you, people are like, oh, that's so sorry for you. But to have somebody listen to you and understand where your shoes are and then help you construct and move forward
Yeah,
instead of just patting you on the shoulder. Oh, that sucks.
okay. Yeah, empathy is a way to support each other. And empathy takes almost another level of engagement because you have to try to imagine what it's like for that other person so you can really feel a little bit of what they feel and then you're more able to support them. Yeah, that is bonding. That is, absolutely. Good. There's probably, oh yeah, over here, please. Okay, personal stories and testimonies? Is that what? Okay, yeah. Absolutely. I think if you share something about your life, you've become, with another person, you've become closer with that person. Absolutely, yeah. Here, Sarah. Time, okay. What kind of time?
Well, just, texting someone or just a short interaction online doesn't really do much for your relationship. But if you're having lunch together,
Mm,
or spending the afternoon together, that can really strengthen create a relationship.
yeah, that's good, yeah. How many of us have, heard when you try to set something up with someone, oh, I'm just so busy, I just don't have time. And what I would recommend in those moments is it can feel overwhelming for all of us, for me too. But rather than just saying, well, I can't, you would try to adapt and modify what could we do? Could we get coffee, for an hour? Could we squeeze something in between other things? So rather than giving up because you're busy, give what you can, which is so much better than nothing of your time to someone. You can give someone a quality 15 minutes, so much better than just no engagement at all. So I'm going to skip that next one, but we'll talk more about how the quality of your friendships is affected as we continue on. I want to talk just a little bit about loneliness. So loneliness is definitely an epidemic in our world. We have the ability to connect in some ways through the means of technology. We have accessibility to others. And yet, because there's not a real reciprocal, genuine, communicative, empathetic, real human relationship there, it's almost a more tragic sense of loneliness because if you're in a crowd and you still feel alone, there's almost something worse about that than just being alone because then you could at least enjoy solitude. So in the digital world, you're always surrounded by hundreds, thousands of others. So loneliness, I wanted to read just one or two things from 12 Ways from Renke. He says, technology is always drawing us apart by design. Our isolation is desired and achieved. So think about like someone who wants to market something to you. Are they going to have an easier job doing that when you're with a group of friends or with a community or when you're by yourself? It's probably when you're by yourself. You have no other influence than their advertisement, right? If they can get you purely focused on what they want to show you, they can monetize that, they can use that, they can influence you more. There's no competing perspective there. There's no attention, there's no reminder of other reality. And so, not saying all these companies are evil, but they do try to isolate you with what they exactly want to show you for as long as possible. So realize that there is a sort of intentionality sometimes by isolating us. Like if you ever seen the film WALL-E, the guys you have in the future, people just sort of riding around on these chairs, and they have a screen, and they're just being taken advantage of by the system at that point. So that's one thing. And then Peter Leithart, who's a theologian, he's quoted. He says humans connect to other humans at so basic a level that when we disconnect, our souls shatter into 1,000 little pieces. So just speak into the devastating effect of loneliness. So when we think about real relationships, and we've just described them, I think, pretty well, one of the things that technology offers us is like shortcuts to things, quicker ways, hacks to get to things, right? Even that word hack, it comes from technology. You know, what's the easy way? What's the shortcut? We want to get there quicker. But there are no hacks for intimacy. There are no hacks for genuine community. So when we try to skip the steps that are necessary to feel like we're connected with our 400 Facebook friends or our 4,000 Facebook friends or whatever, we're really accepting a poor imitation of what the real would be like. Renke writes, friction is the path to genuine authenticity, and no amount of online communication can overcome a lack of real integrity. We must be real with the people of God, with the people God puts into our lives. The world needs what we must be, God-centered, joyful, and trustworthy men and women. We are not flawless. We are fallen repenters who require relational friction to grow and mature. So he's talking about there how God uses relationships to refine us, to help us grow as people, to sharpen us, and to help form us in good ways. We are authentic believers who are committed to replacing easy relationships with authentic ones. So I want to ask another question that we could spend just a minute on here or two. What are the reasons that we avoid pursuing genuine, meaningful, long-term, deep relationships with other people? What are some of the excuses that you use? What are some of the things that keep you from doing that? Or maybe not excuses, maybe they're real reasons. What are the things that make it difficult or that that cause you to avoid what it would take to have real genuine connection with others?
I don't find it really true for me, but developing relationships with people can be messy. And you have to learn to be careful, and you have to learn to respect their opinions, even when you don't agree with them. And that's not easy.
Right.
And I think personal relationships with people face to face are much better. You know, I like Skyping with my brother, but I get real tired of him lecturing me, my younger brother. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Is relationships are messy, and it's easy to say something that's going to set someone off when you didn't mean to, and then you have to cope with anger. None of those things are fun.
Right.
You can find ways around that, and you can learn by that, and you can become better at communicating face to face, and learn things to avoid and learn things to embrace.
Right. This is such an important point. I've seen many relationships that were strong at one point just ripped apart in our modern contentious world by a difference of opinion over this or that point of politics or culture. And it's so sad to see that we should be able to respect difference for the sake of community. And I'm not saying compromise on the truth. I'm just saying to live with other people. Other people, they're so difficult, aren't they? It's never you, it's the other person. But in order to really foster relationships, you do have to be able to endure some discomfort due to difference and even to show respect in the midst of that. Yeah, others. Yes?
It requires something of you to have an intimate relationship.
Yeah, how would you describe what it requires of us? Because that's a good point. It requires something of us.
Well, you have to be emotionally attached, and sometimes that can be exhausting.
Yeah.
They may need something. They may have a need that you can supply. And there's a lot of excuses why you don't want to provide that.
Yeah, those are two really good ones. She mentioned being emotionally available and willing to be emotionally attached to someone. And then I think this is a tough one for a lot of people. Be willing to ask for things from other people. Don't let your pride keep you from accepting help, blessing from others, wisdom from others. I think a lot of us think we have it figured out, or we don't want to ask, we don't want to reach out for help. but that keeps us isolated. Yeah, I saw some other hands, so let's keep going here. Yes?
Listening to someone else about a person with negativity and believing that person as good information.
Yeah, so there's a risk that you might be affected by what the other person has to say and their tone and their attitude. I think there is a risk, absolutely. Being in a relationship is a risk. Opening yourself up to influence from others is a risk, isn't it? Yeah.
Fear of rejection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's all kinds of ways to feel rejected. They didn't call me back. They didn't text me back. They must not like me. They just never try in this friendship, right? That's hurtful. Yeah.
The fear of letting someone down or them letting you down.
Yeah. You don't want to disappoint other people. That's hurtful. So better to just avoid it altogether. That it could feel that way.
Yeah, and the other way.
And yeah, they might disappoint you, which is actually true, by the way, in relationships. That is a real risk. There is no guarantee that the other person will respond to you in the right way or the way that you treat them. There is no formula to make another person loyal to you or loving to you or kind to you. People come to me and ask, how do you get other people to be the way you want? And I'm sorry, I just don't know. But you can be willing to try. You can be wise and prudent. You can be aware, because certain people you're just not going to be able to be friends with. Maybe because of their character, maybe because you don't connect enough. And that's okay. That's okay. But there is a risk. There's a risk, absolutely. Any others? And we'll wrap up. Okay, there are a lot of reasons to be a little bit hesitant when we think of approaching relationships and community. This is a community, right? Your church is a community. Our gathering tonight is a community. Do we want it to be a real community where we're mutually, refining and shaping and helping one another? Or do we want to all be on our phones talking to other people who are in different communities, other places? And you're not. You're being very polite, so paying attention. I appreciate that. Here's something I'd recommend. During the lockdowns, because this was an interesting kind of experiment on the whole world, and a really difficult one, when we're told to socially distance, isolate, for the sake of our health and safety, which I understand, we were also told that to live separately should be okay. In a sense, we were told you should be able to do this, and you shouldn't be overly negatively affected by it. But I'm going to make a confession here. Our family decided, we're still going to meet with people who aren't in our family because we have to. And we'll duck if any cars drive by, but we have to. So we actually were meeting with Matt's family every single week. On Sunday nights, we'd have dinner together. We'd talk about what we're going through. We'd encourage one another. We'd laugh together. We'd just enjoy each other's presence. And it's like I could finally appreciate the value of that. So my suggestion to you is, even now that we have more freedom to go places and meet with people, it really helped to actually set up some regularity and put it on a calendar, kind of have it as a part of your weekly rhythm or your daily rhythm or your monthly rhythm, so that you don't have to make the decision at the moment. Because if we just wait till, do you guys want to get together tonight, that might work out, sometimes it might not. But if you actually set up kind of a recurring time when you meet with people, some people have like a coffee they always do on Friday afternoon with so-and-so at this certain location. That's a ritual of connection, or maybe you have dinner, on a certain night and you gather together and it's a blessing to everyone there. It helps to actually make a plan for how that's going to happen and not just sort of mean for it to happen and hope that it happens and then feel guilty that it doesn't happen and wish that it had happened. So sometimes it feels like it would be great if everything was just spontaneous, but if you can actually build some of these connecting rituals into your schedule. One final example. So one of our other pastors gave this example, how he used to just, when he wanted to know something, he would just pull out his phone and, like all of us, check Wikipedia and get the right answer, right? Or maybe the wrong answer, but whatever Wikipedia says. And so he changed that, and he started calling up his dad on the phone and saying, "Dad, I have a question." And that, he said, not only did it enrich their relationship, it showed respect. He actually sometimes would get more interesting answers to his questions. But that was just a little tweak for him. I mean, he just decided, instead of picking up, Wikipedia, I'm going to call my dad and ask him, Dad, what do you think about this? Do you know anything about this topic? Can you tell me anything from your wisdom, from your knowledge, from your experience? So just think about, what could you do? What could you practically do in your life that would be connecting, and how can you make that happen? I'm going to let Matt come back up and talk about the bibliography that we left at the tables. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm just going to talk a couple of minutes because I'm a book pusher. I have this little bookshelf by my door, which is books I'm trying to give to people to read. So I have all kinds of books behind me, and I also have this list of resources. So believe it or not, in 2.5 hours or whatever, we're not going to answer all your questions, and we're not going to be able to give you a full way of living your life with technology. Part of our goal, though, is to get conversations started, to get you thinking, to maybe engage with your family, to engage with your friends, and how can we use things more effectively. So there are these sheets on your tables. It's a bibliography. There's a whole bunch of books there and sources. There's links. A lot of the studies I cited, they're under links. There's a back to it too. I'm not going to highlight all of them, but I just want to highlight a couple that if you are going to pick some books up and read them, here might be some that I would recommend. So Andy Crouch, he wrote a book called Culture Making. He used to be the editor of Christianity Today, so maybe a name you've heard. He wrote this book called The Tech-Wise Family, Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. I really would recommend this book for families, for those of you with children. It's not an anti-tech book. It really isn't. And I think we beat up on things a little bit here and there, but our goal isn't to say technology is evil and bad and stop using it. It's to think about how you're using it, how it's shaping you, and how it's forming you. So I really recommend this book for thinking about how to do technology in your family. I thought this was really fun. So this book is called My Tech-Wise Life, and it's written by his daughter, who grew up in the way he approached things. So Amy Crouch, and he writes like letters at the end of the chapters responding to it. So I love these in tandem, the Tech-Wise Family and My Tech-Wise Life. So those would be a couple that I would highlight. This one's a little more academic, and maybe not very many of you would want to read it. It's kind of a PhD thesis turned into a book. It's sometimes kind of dry. But I think that some of this is really interesting. It's called People of the Screen: How Evangelicals Created the Digital Bible and How It Shapes Their Reading of Scripture. And this isn't negative, by the way. So I don't know how many of you have the Bible on your phone, but probably a decent amount of you do. I do. I don't use it very often, but I do have it. But he talks about how having the Bible on your phone and using it on your phone, how it shapes you differently. And there's some positives and negatives. You understand it less, but you read it more. Actually, people who create Bible reading plans and use it on their phone read their Bibles more regularly. I wouldn't have guessed that. Anyway, I think that's interesting. But they understand it less. If they take quizzes, you read the Bible, a physical copy of the Bible, you read a copy of the Bible digitally, and then you take a quiz on what you just read. You do much better if you read it physically, especially men. Actually, women, it's not that big of a difference, but for men, it's actually a really big difference. I don't know why that is. But I just think that was interesting, and the only point I wanted to make with that is how you use something does shape you. It's not neutral. There might be some advantages to using something digitally and disadvantages, and isn't it worth knowing what those advantages are and those disadvantages are? So maybe you won't read that one, but maybe you will. Yeah, there's a couple of other books here. I'm looking for one. Maybe I misplaced it, or somebody stole my book. I don't know. But this one is called iGen. This is a little bit older, but I think helpful. Why today's super connected kids are growing up less rebellious, more tolerant, less happy, and completely unprepared for adulthood. That sounds really negative, but it is helpful for understanding what this may be doing to some of our children. And maybe I just didn't bring a book that I meant to highlight. Another one for maybe families, but it doesn't have to be a family. You can do this on your own too. Plugged In, Connecting Your Faith with What You Watch, Read, and Play by Daniel Strange, forward by Timothy Keller. You might have heard of him. But there's a lot more books back here. If you want to come look at my books, and I will try to encourage you to read one or two of them, you'd be welcome to afterwards. So I think at this point, there's not a lot of time, but we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A. Do you want us both up here?
If you guys could hit the, yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Margie? So it's been suggested by the powers that be that I moderate the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah.
The people who are behind the algorithms.
Do you want me to turn these off?
No, you can keep that.
Okay,
Keep
okay.
that. So, but it's just helpful because I know people's names and. So we've got maybe 10 minutes or so for questions. Tom, yes. Real loudly.
So this will probably get me excommunicated.
Here, you.
The quote of the day, as far as I'm concerned, is Bill Meyer talking about the addictive effect of the addiction of this. Oh, I get the
You get
microphone.
the mic, yeah.
Go away. And so, when you're talking about addiction on this, and he likened it to the tobacco farmers. So that's a nicotinic, that's an energy stimulating addiction. Whereas in this arena, we're talking about dopamine addiction. And what dopamine does to our brains, it makes us attracted and wanting it more and more and more, and then it becomes a huge part of our lives. And so it gets to be like technologies like rat poison, where that 2% will kill you. And so you really have to watch how you're going to manage that 2%. And you don't want to be like that Proverbs 7 verse 8 fellow who hangs near her door and...
Is there a question?
Yes. I want... No. You gave multiple examples about how we should get involved in other things, go take a walk and things like that. You're not going to do that against an addiction, especially a dopamine addiction. And so that's where I'd like to hear more about how to actually break the addiction.
Yeah, but here's one thing I will say about breaking addictions, and there are different kinds of addictions, right? I think a nicotine addiction is different than a dopamine addiction and so forth, and might depend on what your addiction is. But you don't get rid of addictions by just saying, I'm going to stop doing this. You have to replace it with something. And I think that's part of thinking about this, what times am I doing this, or what spaces is this filling, and what can I replace it with? I think there are also little things. So I don't think of myself particularly as someone who spends tons of time online and social media, but then there'll be times where something's going on and I have my phone by me a lot and it starts taking over. And so I think little habits like moving your phone from your bedroom and buying an old school alarm clock. And I think you should buy these for your kids instead of using your phone for your alarm clock. I think that can make a big difference in just the space change. One other thing I will say, I'm just going to poke a little bit. I think it's really unfair, and maybe you can disagree with me. This is my opinion. Think about it. I think it's really unfair to give young kids these devices and not parent them. You, as a parent, you need to be responsible for how these are being used and how they're shaping and forming your kids, and not just leave it in their pocket all the time. If they end up with addictions and problems with that, I would say that's the parent's fault, not the kid's fault. And I think parents need to take some responsibility for that. So I think it's really important, and that's part of even why going for a walk without your phone, you might feel really uncomfortable for 30, 40 minutes, but you might also learn to enjoy it. So you need to replace bad habits with good ones. You'll never get rid of a bad habit by just saying, I'm going to stop it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. Good answers. At first, I would want to know if it's an addiction, does the person see it as a problem? Can they see the problems with it? Can they see how it's leading them in a destructive way? Because if they don't, they're probably not going to stop it and change it. But if they do, if they see this is actually a problem, I keep doing it, I have a habit, an addiction to do it, but I want to stop, then that's a better conversation, right? Because then we can think, what are the points of decision that you have more control to stop before the final point of decision, when you're right about to engage in the whatever gives you the dopamine hit. And dopamine is a chemical that's naturally in our bodies, in our brains, and so it's there for a reason. It just gets overstimulated with these digital mediums. So one, I'd say find, there's a kind of process, you could say, of decision making, and it gets more difficult as the process goes closer and closer to the acting out, whatever that happens to be, and find the point where you can have greater success if you try to discipline yourself to make a different decision. And so there are specifics you could do with that, but usually with addictions we use the language of like sobriety. So I agree with Matt, if we're looking at sobriety from, let's say, overuse of digital mediums, you want to have a life that's worth being sober for, so that when you remove these big dopamine rushes that you get, that you're not just like kind of left with this vacuum, that you're not having fun and you're not happy, because you're definitely going to go back to the dopamine, then, the overstimulated dopamine. So you want to have a life where you're actually engaged, you're enjoying things in a healthy way, and you don't even need to go seek the kind of comfort or escape that you used to get from the device. Yeah.
One more, Kendra.
Nice. Good for you. Certainly God could enable anything.
Yeah. I think there are differences between people there. I think some people really can quit things cold turkey. My grandmother was like that actually with smoking. There was a traumatic event that occurred related to that, whereas my grandfather took him 20 years to quit smoking. And so I think sometimes certain things, some people can do that, others can't, and maybe you could do it with one habit or another. And maybe can't is too strong of a word, but difficult at the very least. But I would think of even Paul, when Paul is saying in Ephesians, for instance, 4 and 5, no, don't steal. He doesn't just say don't steal. He says work hard so that you can be generous. And so I think that the key to overcoming sin isn't just to stop sinning, it's to also to do good and seek virtue. And that would be kind of the point I would make. But yeah, I don't disagree that sometimes people can stop a bad habit, but it's more difficult to stop it that way often.
Maybe one or two more. How about some parenting questions? Do we have any? Or well, yeah, go ahead, Marla. Okay, I'm going to give you this microphone. You get the microphone.
What happens once you get them on to the media? That seems to be their world, and all their friends are on it, and stuff like that. How do you detox them without them driving you completely insane? I don't know how else to put it. Like, as soon as the media gets turned off in my house, all of a sudden they pay attention to me and, harass me and stuff. So I'm just...
Well, I'm not sure you're going to like this answer. I think maybe we need to be able to be harassed a little bit. I think that maybe, and I don't want to speak to your situation too much because I don't know your whole situation, but I think sometimes we so want kids to be quiet, and we so want them to be behaved that we give them things that will help them behave, but that are kind of sucking some of the life out of them. And I think it's really important. I think Richard kind of said this too. The answer isn't just to take things away. You need to give them things that are good and meaningful. It's not effective to say to children, okay, we'll keep you off of social media, keep you off of this, and keep you off of this, and keep you off of this, and we'll just stay in your room and do nothing. They need something that is life-giving and meaningful. They need quality time and some of that is with us, and some of it's with other adults. I think another mistake some parents make is thinking that you're the only one that they need. This is a difficulty in our modern era. Both my parents and my wife's parents don't live around us, and so. But I think my kids, my children, they need other adults in their life too, that will love them and meaningfully speak into their life. And that's one really important function of the church, as well as extended family. So the part I'll push back in is, I think you need to be able to put up with some of their driving you crazy, and not all of it. There's some of it, but you're also not the only one your kids need, and so. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
Well, it's not only just like the big chunk of time. I'm not trying to get them to, just go sit in their room.
Yeah.
But how we were talking about earlier, every single moment in between things have to be filled with something. Right?
Yep.
Like, I've got 5 minutes away from the bus. I better look at something.
Right.
Right? They kind of get the same as we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think finding things to give them that are what's better. What can you give them that's better than this? Look for those things, whether it's drawing or art, something that's creative or they're active rather than passive. That might be a way of thinking of it. And that can be technology, right? But there's a big difference between just being a mindless consumer of tech, and that's really what I think is kind of dangerous, versus an active participant and creator. If you can get your kids to do those sorts of things in an active, I think that's great and is helpful for them in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit to that. Our son is 2, so he's pretty young, but we're trying to think of what we introduce him to and what habits we start with him. We're not perfect in that. We're finding our way, and he does watch screens sometimes, and so it is a temptation to overuse that for me. Absolutely, just say, there you are, plop you there, screen, now I can go get something done. But when we want to interrupt him from that, or take it away or turn it off, it works much better when I say, hey Caspian, let's go over here and do this, rather than just turning it off. Because if it turns off, he's gonna go looking for something to pay attention to, and he might be acting out, he might be mischievous. But if I say, hey, let's do this, and I know we can't always do that, so sometimes what I do is just sing to him, and I'm not a very good singer, but he doesn't know that. Yeah. So he suddenly just listens, and he just is calmer. I don't know. So I think there are different levels of attention you can give to them, but I know attention helps, and you can't always give your full attention. I'm getting that, but I do want to limit his use of screens, and I always try to guide him into something else that's better for him instead of just removing it. But yeah, that's easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. I think they're always watching us to see how are we using screens. We're modeling things all the time. Yeah. Richard, we were kind of hoping you could sing for us tonight.
Not going to happen.
Is that not going to happen?
No.
That's not going to happen?
Yeah.
Okay. One last question. Margie thought she saw someone, maybe? Did you want to say something, Diane?
I was just going to say we have some books to give away.
Yes, we have some books to give away. Oh, yeah. How does that work? Is there a game or something? How do we do this? Do you want the microphone? Okay.
I love a microphone. I've got books to give away. I love trivia, and so I have trivia questions. So you're on the edge of your seats now. I see that. And they have nothing to do with what we've discussed, just so you know. But the first one is already determined, because I understand somebody was here a half an hour ahead of the meeting. A half an hour early is not a part of vocabulary. But Joel, were you here early today? Where is Joel? Oh, Joel, well, we have a book for you. So you got to read it. Okay. The wolf. He's getting the wolf in their pockets, and I have another one that book. Sure, that would be great. Oh, and if you have an answer for me, would you stand up, because I don't want anybody offended by me calling on the wrong person. Okay, tonight I talked to my 2-year-old grandson, and he was singing "We Will Rock You." And so I'm asking you, what group made "We Will Rock You" famous? And who was the lead singer? 2-part question. Okay. She got it. Okay, I'll give her it. Okay, tonight is a concert in Britain for the once-in-a-generation coronation. And if you can name one of the artists who is performing at that concert. Oh my, okay, good. Yes. Let's give her this one. Andrea Bocelli, also, if you're cultured, and Katy Perry. Yes, very good. You could have gotten a book. Okay, here's a hard one. The movie Mario Brothers, in 26 days, made $1 billion in ticket sales. Do you know an animated film that made $1 billion in 24 days? This is a tough one. What was that? Frozen. Yes. Okay, got one more. All right, and hopefully somebody that has younger children maybe would like this one. So I'll make this a little more, let's see, easier, okay? Name 4 states that border British Columbia. 4 states that border British Columbia. Got one? Do it, David. Canada, Washington, Idaho, Alaska. Washington, Idaho, Alaska. Got it. Hooray.
Thank you. So yeah, take a look at some of these books up here. I just finished reading that Chris Martin book. He's super interesting, loves social media, loves TikTok, but is also very careful about how it's shaping us. A wise voice. So can we express our appreciation to these brothers for coming? Yeah. I don't want to rob you of the last word, but if you're good? Okay. Then I will pray for us and we will be dismissed. Thank you all for coming, and a huge thank you to the Kings, the Wisdoms, to our sound guys and others who helped set up all this stuff, so that was wonderful. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we commit our lives to you. We want to be living for your glory. We want to be people who are being shaped by your voice more than by any other voice. And we just offer ourselves to you this evening. We ask for your Holy Spirit to be giving us greater discernment on how to live as your creatures, in a creaturely existence, having received life from you, and help us to make wise use of these technologies for your glory. And we pray that each one of us would take these things to heart, and it would be useful in your kingdom and for your glory. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thank you all for coming.